The office air was heavy, filled with whispers that pricked Clara's skin like needles. Clara said, "Why now? Why must the truth surface when I've worked so hard to stay unseen?" Her words trembled, but her eyes burned with a sudden fire. David leaned on the desk, his voice sharp but steady, because hiding has broken you more than the world ever could. The sound of the door slamming echoed like thunder, shattering her fragile calm. Papers scattered across the floor, as if mocking her attempts at order. Clara clutched her chest, feeling each beat like a drum calling her into battle. The fluorescent lights flickered above, adding to the storm swirling in her heart. Shadows stretched across the gray walls, whispering of betrayal she could no longer deny. Clara said everything I believed. It was all built on lies. David's jaw tightened, his silence heavier than words. The room seemed to close in, trapping her in the suffocating truth. She wanted to scream, to tear down the walls, to finally let the world hear her voice. Instead, her breath hitched, a quiet rebellion against despair. Clara sat at her desk, the silence louder than any scream. Clara said, "They saw me fail again." Her words were sharp, fragile, like glass ready to shatter. She leaned her head on her folded arms, hiding from the stares that weren't even there. Memories surged, teachers doubting her, colleagues dismissing her, her family whispering that she was never enough. Each voice echoed in the sterile room, filling the emptiness. David stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his tone blunt. "You're not failing, Clara. You're suffocating in their judgment." She winced, hearing the truth like salt on an open wound. Clara whispered, "But I can't silence them, David. Their words are louder than mine." The ticking of the clock grew oppressive, marking every second she spent doubting herself. The walls seemed to lean closer, pressing her down. David's gaze was unwavering, his expression carved in stone. He said, "Silence isn't peace, Clara. It's surrender." Her chest tightened, each breath harder than the last, yet something flickered within her. A stubborn ember resisting the dark. Rain tapped against the office window, steady as a drumbeat marking Clara's unraveling thoughts. Clara said, "I wish I could disappear." She pressed her palm against the glass, watching droplets race like tiny lives fleeing downward. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, relentless and heavy. David's reflection appeared behind her, his voice steady. "Running from yourself only takes you in circles." Clara turned, her eyes wide with hurt. She said, "You don't know what it's like to be invisible until it's too late." David's brow furrowed, his silence sharp as the thunder outside. A flash of lightning illuminated Clara's tear-streaked face, her navy blouse clinging to her shoulders with dampness from earlier rain. The office smelled faintly of wet paper and metal. She gripped the window frame tighter, nails pressing into wood. "You," Clara whispered. "Every step forward feels like I'm dragging chains." The storm thundered louder, as if mocking her weakness, but David's steady gaze cut through the dark. For the first time, she didn't look away. The elevator ride home was suffocating. Clara said, "I don't belong anywhere." Her reflection in the metal doors looked foreign, hollow eyes staring back. Each floor passed with a low groan, echoing her unease. She hugged her bag to her chest, as if shielding herself from the world. The air smelled of oil and iron, sterile and cold. David's voice replayed in her mind, cutting through the hum. "Silence isn't peace, it's surrender." She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I've surrendered too long." The ding of the final floor startled her, and she stumbled out into the empty lobby. Rain-soaked footsteps trailed behind her, a reminder of the storm she carried inside. Her shoes squeaked against the marble floor, each step hesitant. She glanced back at the elevator, wishing she could retreat, yet her legs pulled her forward. Outside, the rain poured harder, like the world demanding she face it head-on. For the first time that night, she didn't flinch. Clara stood on the rain-drenched street, her hair plastered to her face, chest rising with sharp breaths. Clara said, "I'm tired of drowning in silence." The night air was cold, but her veins burned with restless fire. The street lamps buzzed, spilling pale halos across the slick pavement. She walked forward, every step heavy but certain. Car horns blared distantly, their sound muffled by the roar of the rain. Memories surged. Her father's disappointment, her colleagues' dismissals, the relentless whispers that she would never be enough. Each memory pressed on her shoulders like lead. She stopped under a flickering lamp, tilting her head upward, the rain washing her tears away. Clara whispered, "If the world won't hear me, I'll carve my own voice into it." A passing stranger barely glanced at her, but she didn't care. For the first time, her words felt like steel, not glass. Lightning cracked above, thunder rolling as if the storm itself recognized her defiance. And in that moment, she did not feel invisible. Morning light cut sharply across Clara's tired face as she walked into the office, her steps dragging against the polished floor. Clara said, "Another day, another fight to prove I exist." Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the hum of conversations around her. Colleagues glanced, whispered, then turned away, their laughter pricking like invisible needles. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, sterile and suffocating. Clara gripped her folder tighter, her knuckles whitening with silent rage. She sat at her desk, the mountain of reports a reminder of battles she was expected to fight alone. David approached, his tone calm but pointed. "You let them write your story with every silence you give them." Clara snapped, her voice breaking. "And what if I'm too tired to write it myself?" The room went quiet for her, though no one else noticed. She pressed her forehead to her desk, wishing for escape. Yet beneath the fatigue, something still stirred, a flicker that refused to die, even in shadows. Clara scrolled through emails, each subject line a reminder of her invisibility. Clara whispered, "They never see me, only what I deliver." She deleted message after message, her reflection faint on the screen. David placed a mug beside her, his blunt voice cutting through the buzz. "You make yourself invisible, Clara. Stop blaming them." She recoiled, anger mixing with shame. Clara hissed, "You think I haven't tried? You think it's that easy?" Her chest tightened, each breath shallow, the office noise amplifying her isolation. Rain streaked across the window, distant thunder vibrating in the walls. David leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "Easy isn't the point. Necessary is." She slammed her laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in her chest. For a moment, every eye turned toward her, only to return to their own lives, as if she were both spectacle and nothing. Her hands shook, but she didn't look down this time. She stared back at the storm. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and stale bread. Clara stood by the counter, arms folded, her reflection trapped in the microwave door. Clara said, "I'm exhausted of proving I belong where no one wants me." Her voice cracked like a splintering branch. David leaned against the fridge, his tone clipped, "Stop waiting for permission." She flinched, clutching her arms tighter. Clara muttered, "If I push too hard, they'll tear me apart." His chuckle was short, bitter. "They already are." The hum of the vending machine filled the silence that followed. Clara's eyes darted to the door, expecting someone to enter, to catch her weakness on display. Instead, the room stayed empty, suffocating with truth. She looked at David, seeing not pity but challenge in his eyes. Her throat tightened, yet her fists unclenched. For the first time, the break room felt less like a cage, and more like a place where her silence cracked open, letting light in. That afternoon, Clara was assigned another report no one else wanted. She dragged the heavy files across her desk, papers scattering like shards of obligation. Clara said, "I'm buried alive, and they still pile more." Her voice was low, simmering with restrained fury. David pulled up a chair, resting his arms across it casually. He replied, "Then stop letting them bury you." She glared, her eyes burning. "And if I refuse, they'll just find someone else to silence." He shrugged, his indifference sharp. "So what? Silence isn't survival, Clara. It's slow death." The words echoed in her ribs like pounding fists. Her hands trembled as she stacked the papers, but her grip hardened with each page. Clara whispered, "Then maybe I need to stop waiting to be chosen." David smirked faintly, though his eyes softened. For the first time, the weight on her desk felt less like chains, and more like a test she might one day break. The evening descended, and Clara stayed behind, the office nearly empty. Shadows stretched long across her desk, filing cabinets looming like silent witnesses. Clara said, "If I vanished tomorrow, nothing would change." Her voice echoed in the hollow room. David remained, leaning against the doorway, his tone steady. "Then change something, Clara. Anything. But stop disappearing." She shut her eyes, swallowing the knot in her throat. The hum of the air conditioner buzzed in her ears, drowning out her doubt. She opened her eyes, staring at the glowing computer screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Clara whispered, "I don't know how to begin." David stepped closer, voice softer. "You begin by refusing to end." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling, uncertain. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders, yet her breath steadied. For the first time, her silence felt like a choice she could undo. The conference room buzzed with chatter as managers discussed deadlines, their voices sharp like knives. Clara sat at the edge of the table, her notes ready, her voice locked behind clenched teeth. Clara whispered, "They won't hear me." Her chest tightened, heart hammering against silence. A senior manager dismissed her idea without looking up, his pen scratching across paper louder than her courage. David, sitting across, met her eyes with a sharp glance, his expression urging her to rise. Clara said, "If I speak, they'll tear me down." The walls seemed to echo her fear back to her. Laughter erupted at another suggestion, filling the air with cold dismissal. Clara's hand gripped her pen so tightly it snapped in two, ink bleeding across her notes like the voice she never used. David leaned forward, his tone low but cutting, better broken ink than broken spirit. Her breath caught, and for a moment she wanted to fight, but her voice stayed trapped. The hallway after the meeting was a battlefield of whispers. Clara's footsteps echoed as colleagues passed, smirking, their words just loud enough to sting. Clara muttered, "They see me as weak." Her eyes burned, though her lips curved in a forced smile. One colleague laughed, "She never speaks, so why keep her around?" The words cut deeper than any wound. Clara's grip on her bag strap tightened, her knuckles pale. David caught up beside her, voice blunt, "Why do you carry their knives for them?" Clara hissed, "Because every word feels like proof I don't belong." The fluorescent lights flickered, shadows stretching across the sterile walls. She pressed her back against the wall, hiding her trembling hands. David's eyes softened, though his tone stayed sharp. "Stop bleeding for people who wouldn't notice if you disappeared." Her breath quivered, but this time she didn't look away. The fire inside her chest flared, small but alive. That evening Clara stayed late again, the office empty except for the glow of her screen. Rain pattered against the windows, a steady rhythm to her unraveling. Clara whispered, "If I vanish into this work, maybe they'll finally see me." Her hands shook as she typed, her reflection fractured in the glass. David appeared silently, his footsteps soft but his presence heavy. He said, "You think drowning in work proves anything?" She snapped, "At least it keeps me standing." The storm outside raged louder, lightning flashing across her face, revealing exhaustion etched into every line. She pressed her palms against the desk, trembling. Clara muttered, "If I stop, they'll bury me alive." David's voice cut sharp, "They already have, Clara. Stop digging your own grave." Her breath hitched, and for a second, her hands stilled. The storm mirrored her chaos, but also her defiance. Something inside whispered she couldn't keep running forever. The next morning, Clara faced her manager, files stacked between them like barriers. Her voice cracked, "I've done more than anyone here, yet I'm still unseen." The manager waved dismissively, muttering about deadlines and numbers. Her chest tightened, fury boiling in silence. David stood in the corner, arms crossed, his eyes piercing. Clara's fists clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She said, "I'm not invisible." The manager barely looked up, "Then prove it." His words struck like a hammer, cruel and careless. The fluorescent lights buzzed, oppressive. Clara bit her lip until it bled, holding back the scream clawing at her throat. David's gaze locked on her, unyielding, silently urging her to fight. Her heart pounded, and for the first time, the thought of staying silent felt worse than speaking. She turned, shoulders heavy, but her eyes no longer downcast. Something in her had shifted. By nightfall, Clara stood on the rooftop, city lights sprawling beneath like stars. The wind whipped her hair, cool air filling her lungs with defiance. Clara said, "The world has buried me, but I'm still standing." Her voice rose above the city noise, carried by the night. David stepped beside her, his tone even, then stopped, standing in shadows. Clara's heart thudded, stronger than before. She whispered, "I'm afraid." His reply was calm but sharp. "Fear is the first sign you're alive." The city roared below, cars streaming like veins of light. She spread her arms slightly, as if ready to leap, not into death but into life. For the first time she felt weightless, her voice no longer shackled by silence. The night embraced her, storm fading into clarity. Clara whispered, "Then I'll stop running." And with that, her fear began to crack into courage. The office rooftop was drenched in the pale glow of dawn, wind whipping across the concrete as Clara gripped the railing. Clara whispered, "I've carried silence like a shield, but it's become my prison." Her voice trembled against the morning air. David stood beside her, eyes steady, arms folded against the cold. He said, "You think silence keeps you safe, but it's the chains around your throat." Clara's knuckles widened against the railing, her breath uneven. She turned to him, her hair loose, eyes weary, but alive. Clara muttered, "If I speak, they'll crush me." David's reply was sharp, "If you don't, you're crushing yourself." The rising sun spilled across her face, warmth cutting through the chill, painting her in gold. For the first time, her silence felt fragile, like glass ready to break. Clara said, "What if I fail?" David's gaze was unrelenting, then fail loudly. "At least they'll know you were here." Later in the cafeteria, Clara pushed untouched food around her plate, the clatter of trays echoing like distant drums. Clara whispered, "Every time I try to rise, they laugh louder." Her eyes stayed fixed on her hands, trembling against the fork. David sat across, biting into stale bread, tone blunt. "Then let them laugh. Their noise is nothing compared to your silence." Clara's chest tightened, shame crawling across her face. She said, "You don't understand what it's like to always be overlooked." David leaned closer, his voice cutting. "I understand what it's like to waste yourself hiding." The cafeteria buzzed with voices, but around them, the world narrowed. Clara's fork clattered to the tray, her breath quickening. For the first time, David's words weren't daggers, they were keys. She said softly, "Maybe I've been waiting for permission that will never come." His nod was small, but his eyes shone with quiet victory. Clara walked through the park after work, the city alive with murmurs of evening traffic. Clara whispered, "They'll never see me as more than shadows." Her reflection rippled in the fountain water as her words sank with the ripples. David strolled beside her, hands in pockets, his tone low but fierce, then stopped, waiting for their eyes, forced them to listen. Clara paused, staring at her blurred reflection. She said, "I've been drowning in fear for so long, I don't know how to breathe without it." David stopped, turning toward her. "You breathe by choosing to fight, even when you're gasping." The city lights shimmered across the fountain, gilding her in fragments of gold. Clara lifted her chin, shoulders trembling but firming with each breath. For the first time, she didn't flinch from her reflection. Her whisper carried further, "Maybe it's time to stop hiding." David's nod was faint but approving, like the first crack of dawn through night. Back at her desk the next morning, Clara faced the mountain of reports with unsteady resolve. Clara whispered, "Every page they give me is another attempt to bury me." Her hands pressed firmly against the files, no longer trembling. David appeared at her side, resting a hand on the desk, his voice blunt, "Then use their dirt to build your foundation." She looked up, eyes flickering with doubt and defiance. Clara said, "What if I crumble halfway through?" His jaw tightened, then crumble, but keep standing in the rubble. Around them, the office buzzed with indifference, co-workers tapping keys, ignoring the war waged in silence. Clara's chest rose sharply, a breath torn between fear and fire. Her lips pressed together, then parted, her whisper firmer. "Maybe I'm not as breakable as they think." The words felt heavier, solid, anchoring her to something stronger. For the first time, she stacked the files with steady hands. The rooftop called her again that night, city lights blazing like 1,000 watching eyes. Clara stood at the edge, arms crossed, hair lifting in the wind. Clara whispered, "All my life I've been waiting for someone to save me." David stepped closer, his tone sharp but steady. "No one's coming, Clara. You are your own savior." Her throat tightened, heart pounding against the truth. She said, "What if I'm not enough?" His reply was blunt, cutting. "Enough isn't given, it's claimed." The city roared below, neon veins pulsing like fire through darkness. Clara's eyes narrowed, her breath deepening, her chest expanding as though she'd finally found oxygen. She said, "Then I'll claim it." David's gaze softened, but he said nothing, the silence between them heavier than words. For the first time, Clara's voice didn't tremble, it echoed, fierce and unbroken. She turned her face to the wind, no longer hiding. The boardroom was filled with murmurs as Clara entered, holding a folder heavier than her own fears. Clara said, "Today I'll speak." Her voice cracked, but it carried across the polished table. The manager sneered, tapping his pen impatiently. Clara laid out documents that revealed years of overlooked credit, projects she built but never owned. Gasps filled the room, sharp as breaking glass. David stood against the wall, his eyes steady, watching her ignite. The manager barked, "These are lies." Clara's voice rose, trembling but unyielding. "They are the truth you buried to silence me." Papers slid across the glossy wood, undeniable proof. Silence suffocated the room, every stare fixed on her. Her heart thundered, but her shoulders stayed tall. David nodded faintly, a silent confirmation. For the first time, Clara was no longer invisible. Her words, fragile but fierce, cracked open the walls of their indifference. The air grew heavy as Clara's words echoed, unshakable now. Clara said, "You erased me, but I will not be erased again." Her chest heaved, breath sharp like fire. A colleague shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "She's exaggerating." Clara's eyes locked on him, burning. "Do you call proof exaggeration?" The room fell silent. Only the hum of the projector remained. David's jaw tightened, but his gaze never wavered. Clara's pulse thundered, fear clawing yet caged by resolve. Her hands trembled, but she pressed them flat on the table, anchoring herself. She whispered, "I carried your silence for years. Now, I return it to you." The words cut like steel, shattering the complacency in the room. No one laughed, no one dismissed, her voice was undeniable. For the first time, Clara's silence had transformed into a blade sharper than any ridicule. The manager slammed his palm against the table, his voice booming, "You think this changes anything?" Clara's heart jolted, but her voice was stronger than her fear. Clara said, "It changes everything because now the truth is spoken." His eyes narrowed, venomous. The room bristled with tension, chairs creaking as people shifted uncomfortably. David's expression was unreadable, yet his eyes gleamed with approval. Clara's lips quivered, but she didn't falter. She continued, "You used my silence as your shield. Today I tear it down." Her breath came heavy, but it was not weakness. It was release. The manager's fists clenched, but no denial could erase the evidence laid bare. For the first time, Clara stood unbroken, her words echoing like thunder against steel walls. The storm outside mirrored the one within, rain pelting the glass in relentless fury. Yet her voice, steady and fierce, carried above it all. The storm inside the boardroom broke with whispers, some voices in awe, others in anger. Clara said, "For years I gave you silence. Today I take it back." Her words sliced through the tension. her breath steady now. David unfolded his arms, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. A woman in the corner whispered, "She was behind all of it?" Clara straightened, her shoulders no longer weighed down, her presence unshakable. The manager sputtered, "This is betrayal." Clara turned her gaze on him, her voice ice and fire. "No, this is truth." The projector light flickered, painting her face in defiant glow. Her trembling was gone, replaced by a stillness that commanded attention. Clara's voice rose once more, final and fierce. "You will not bury me again." The silence that followed was deafening, like the pause before thunder shakes the earth. The boardroom dissolved into silence, every eye fixed on Clara. She stood unshaken, her voice carrying across the void. Clara said, "I was invisible but no more." Her chest rose, the chains of years breaking. David's gaze softened, pride flickering in his stern eyes. The storm outside calmed, raindrops sliding like tears finally shed. Clara whispered, "This is my voice. I will not let it be stolen again." Her words hung heavy in the air, undeniable. The manager's lips pressed shut, his anger hollow against her defiance. A shift stirred in the room, not approval, not yet, but recognition. For the first time she existed fully in their sight. Clara closed the folder with deliberate finality, the sound echoing like a gavel striking judgment. She turned toward the door, her steps heavy but resolute. Behind her, the silence wasn't dismissal anymore. It was respect reluctantly born. The boardroom's silence lingered long after Clara's revelation, but whispers spread like sparks through dry grass. Clara said, "If truth has cost me my place here, then let it." Her voice trembled, but carried steel beneath the cracks. The manager's glare was venom, but powerless against the evidence laid bare. A colleague muttered, "She won't survive this," yet his eyes avoided hers, betraying unease. David moved closer, his tone sharp, "She's already survived worse." Clara's pulse hammered as she stood taller, no longer folding inward. The room became a furnace, heat rising from glares, disbelief and shifting alliances. She whispered to herself, "They can't unhear me now." For the first time, the fire she carried did not burn her alone. It spilled into the room, igniting doubt in those who had dismissed her. Her silence was no longer a cage, it was their weapon turned back on them. The manager rose, voice booming, "You think you can challenge everything we've built?" Clara's heart pounded, but her voice didn't falter. Clara said, "I'm not challenging truth, I'm demanding you stop burying it." His fists slammed the table, but the sound no longer silenced her. David's sharp tone cut in, "Truth doesn't vanish because you deny it." Gasps rippled through the room, tension electrifying the air. Clara's shoulders straightened, her words like flame. "You use me as silence. That ends now." The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder pounding like her heartbeat. Fear swirled in her chest, but she spoke through it, shaping it into defiance. For the first time her voice carried louder than his rage. The balance shifted, not fully in her favor, but no longer against her. She was no longer the forgotten shadow in the room. She was its center. Colleagues whispered, their unease thick as smoke. One woman murmured, "She's right," earning a sharp glare from the manager. Clara caught the exchange, her breath quickening. Clara whispered, "The truth spreads faster than lies." David's approving nod steadied her pulse. The manager roared, "Enough. You're finished here." His words echoed, final and cruel. But Clara's reply was steady. "If speaking truth ends me, then so be it." The weight of years broke from her shoulders in that moment, her spine straightening like steel. David's eyes gleamed with quiet pride. The colleagues who had laughed before now lowered their eyes, guilt flickering across their faces. Clara said, "I will not vanish. Not for you. Not for anyone." Her voice rose, thunder answering outside as if the storm recognized her defiance. She was no longer asking for a place at their table. She was carving her own. The confrontation spilled past walls. Words spread across the office floor like wildfire. Clara walked through cubicles, whispers chasing her. Clara said, "They will know my name, whether in anger or respect. Her eyes no longer lowered. Each step was steady. David followed, his voice low but firm. "This is where you claim the ground they stole." Colleagues stared, some with awe, others with disdain, but no one dismissed her anymore. The weight of invisibility fell away, replaced by presence she'd never allowed herself to own. Clara whispered, "I will not carry their silence again." The air vibrated with tension. The storm fading outside, replaced by stillness. For the first time she felt the office not as a cage, but as a battlefield she no longer feared to cross. That night, Clara returned to the rooftop, city lights blazing beneath her. Clara whispered, "I faced them, and I did not break." Her words drifted into the night like sparks. David joined her, his tone quiet but steady. "You've only just begun." The wind tore through her hair, but her stance was rooted, her gaze steady on the horizon. Clara said, "For the first time, the silence isn't mine, it's theirs." The city roared below, alive with movement, indifferent, yet witness to her awakening. Her heart no longer felt chained. It beat freely, fiercely, unbroken. David's voice softened. "Now they know who you are. The rest depends on whether you believe it." Clara exhaled, a breath lighter than any she'd taken before. She whispered, "I believe it." And in that moment, the night did not feel like emptiness. It felt like possibility. The morning sun poured through Clara's apartment window, its warmth soft against her face. She sat at her small wooden table, hands wrapped around a mug, her reflection faint in the steam. Clara whispered, "I am not the same woman who hid in silence." Her chest rose with steady rhythm, breath no longer shallow with fear. The city hummed below, alive yet indifferent, and still it felt different to her now. David's voice echoed in memory. "Enough isn't given, it's claimed." Clara smiled faintly, realizing she had claimed something far greater than approval. She had claimed herself. The walls of her apartment no longer felt like cages but sanctuaries. She touched the papers spread across the table, her notes, her truth, her work finally unhidden. Clara said, "For once, I do not need them to see me. I see myself." The words, simple and small, were heavier than any storm she had endured. At work, Clara entered the office with her head high, footsteps echoing with a rhythm she had never carried before. Colleagues glanced up, their whispers no longer daggers but uncertain acknowledgments. Clara thought, "They know now. They cannot erase me." She walked past cubicles that had once felt like walls pressing inward. David met her at her desk, his expression unreadable but proud. He said quietly, "You've changed the air here, Clara." Her lips curled in a faint smile. "No, I changed myself." The hum of typing and conversations returned, but she no longer shrank beneath it. She belonged, not because they allowed her, but because she decided to. The silence she carried was gone, replaced by her presence that filled every step, every word, every breath. For the first time she didn't feel invisible in this place. She felt undeniable. The rooftop became Clara's sanctuary. That evening, she leaned against the railing, the city's neon veins glowing beneath her. Clara said, "Every storm tried to break me, but I'm still here." Her voice, no longer trembling, carried across the night wind. David stood beside her, arms resting on the railing, his tone steady. "You are not just here, you're unshakable." Clara tilted her head back, the stars faint above the city haze. She whispered, "I thought invisibility was safety, but silence was the loudest death of all." David's faint smile curved, his silence this time a gift, not a weight. Clara closed her eyes, letting the cool air wash over her face. For the first time, she welcomed the night without fear. Her heart pulsed with a rhythm steady, alive, unbroken. Clara whispered, "I will never vanish again." The following day, Clara addressed a small group of younger colleagues in the break room, their faces expectant. Clara said, "Do not wait for permission to exist. Speak even when they laugh, even when they deny you." Her voice was calm, but fire burned beneath each word. A young woman whispered, "But what if they crush us?" Clara's smile was gentle but firm. Then you rise again, louder. Her words lit the air, filling the sterile room with possibility. David leaned at the doorway, arms crossed, his expression one of rare softness. Clara's chest lifted with pride, not for herself alone, but for the echoes her voice could leave in others. The chains that had bound her for years now became lessons she passed forward. Clara whispered, "Strength grows when it is shared." And for the first time, she saw her reflection in their hopeful eyes. Night fell again, and Clara walked the rain-slick streets, her reflection gleaming in every puddle. Clara whispered, "I was silence, but now I am voice." The city roared around her, indifferent yet alive, and she matched its pulse step for step. A street lamp flickered above, casting her in a halo of shifting light. Her bag hung loose at her side, no longer a shield but a companion. She tilted her face to the rain, eyes unflinching. David's words returned, "You begin by refusing to end." She smiled faintly, the truth now her own. Clara said, "I refuse to end. I begin again." Her voice rang against the night, soft yet unstoppable. The storm within had stilled, replaced by strength unyielding. Her silence was gone forever, and in its place, an echo that would never fade.